Along the wide and slowly moving waters of the Yellow River, early communities began to settle in patterns that would, over time, form the foundations of one of the world's longest continuous civilizations. The land here was shaped by layers of fine soil carried by the river, creating fertile ground that supported the steady growth of crops. In these quiet surroundings, people lived close to the rhythms of nature, observing the seasons and adjusting their lives accordingly. The river itself was both a source of nourishment and a presence to be respected. Its waters could shift and change, sometimes gently nourishing the fields, and at other times altering the landscape. Over many generations, communities learned to live alongside it, building simple structures, forming pathways, and cultivating the land with care. Early settlements were often modest in scale. Homes were made from earth and wood, shaped by hand and arranged in small groups. Smoke from cooking fires would rise slowly into the air, blending with the natural surroundings. Daily life followed a steady rhythm, guided by daylight, weather, and the needs of the land. Within these early communities, shared practices began to form. People worked together to grow food, store resources, and maintain their surroundings. Tools were simple, often made from stone or early forms of metal, yet they were used with skill and attention. Over time, these repeated actions created a sense of continuity, linking one generation to the next. As these settlements expanded, patterns of organization began to emerge. Leaders were recognized, and early forms of structure developed, not through sudden change, but through gradual agreement and shared understanding. These early systems would later grow into more defined dynasties. The landscape remained a constant presence throughout this development. Fields stretched outward from the settlements, and the river continued its steady movement. Trees, grasses, and open skies framed daily life, providing both resources and a sense of place. In this way, the beginnings of ancient Chinese civilization unfolded quietly, shaped by the land, the river, and the steady efforts of the people who lived there. In the early traditions of ancient China, the Xia Dynasty is often described as the first organized dynasty to emerge from the growing communities along the Yellow River. While much about this period remains quiet and partially hidden by time, it represents an important step in the gradual shaping of social and political structure. The Xia period is associated with the transition from small, loosely connected settlements into more coordinated forms of leadership. Villages that once functioned independently began to recognize shared systems, guided by individuals who were entrusted with responsibility over land and resources. This shift did not happen suddenly, but formed slowly through repeated cooperation and practical necessity. Agriculture remained central to daily life. Fields were carefully tended, with crops planted and harvested according to seasonal patterns. Water management became increasingly important, as communities worked to guide the flow of rivers and prevent flooding. Simple channels and barriers were constructed, reflecting an early understanding of how to live alongside natural forces. Homes during this time were often built from packed earth, shaped into stable forms that provided shelter from weather. Roofs were supported by wooden frames, and interiors were arranged with simplicity. These structures were placed in clusters, forming early villages that balanced openness with shared space. Craftwork also began to develop further. Pottery, tools, and basic forms of metalwork were created with care, reflecting both utility and a growing sense of refinement. These objects were used in daily routines, from cooking to farming, becoming part of the steady rhythm of life. The idea of leadership during the Xia period is often described as hereditary, with roles passing from one generation to the next. This created continuity, allowing systems to remain stable over time. Leadership was closely connected to the ability to maintain harmony within the land and community. Though physical evidence from this period is limited, the lasting impression of the Xia Dynasty lies in its role as a beginning. It represents the early shaping of patterns that would continue through later dynasties. In this way, the Xia period can be understood as a quiet foundation, where organization, agriculture, and shared life gradually formed into a more connected society. Over time, the early foundations of organized life developed further during the Shang Dynasty, a period remembered for its growing cities and refined craftsmanship. Settlements became more structured, with defined areas for living, working, and ceremonial activity. These spaces were arranged with intention, creating a sense of order within the landscape. Buildings were often constructed using rammed earth, forming strong walls that could support larger structures. Within these settlements, workshops appeared where skilled artisans worked with materials such as clay, bone, and metal. Among these crafts, bronze work became especially significant, reflecting both technical ability and careful attention to detail. Bronze objects were created through a process that required planning and precision. Molds were shaped from clay, and molten metal was poured carefully to form vessels, tools, and ceremonial items. The finished pieces often displayed intricate patterns, suggesting a quiet focus on design as well as function. These objects were used in daily life as well as in ritual settings, becoming part of the cultural rhythm of the time. The presence of organized spaces extended beyond workshops. Storage areas were developed to hold grain and other resources, helping communities prepare for seasonal changes. This allowed for a more stable way of life, where resources could be managed over longer periods. Daily routines remained steady. People moved through their tasks with care, whether tending to fields, preparing food, or crafting objects. The environment shaped these activities, with natural light guiding the pace of the day and seasonal changes influencing the work that needed to be done. Animals were also part of this environment, kept for food, labor, or companionship. Their presence added to the quiet continuity of life within the settlements. As the Shang Dynasty continued, these patterns of structured living and skilled craftsmanship became more refined. The combination of organized space and careful production created an environment where both daily needs and cultural practices could develop side by side. In this way, the Shang period reflects a gradual deepening of complexity, where craft, structure, and routine came together in a balanced and enduring form. During the Shang Dynasty, a quiet yet lasting development began to take shape in the form of early Chinese writing. This system of symbols emerged gradually, formed through repeated use and careful observation. It provided a way to record thoughts, events, and practices, allowing knowledge to be preserved beyond immediate memory. One of the most well-known forms of early writing from this time appears on oracle bones. These were typically pieces of animal bone or turtle shell, prepared with smooth surfaces. Small characters were carefully carved into them, forming lines of meaning that reflected both language and belief. The use of oracle bones was closely connected to ritual practices. In a calm and methodical process, questions were inscribed onto the surface. These questions often related to natural events, harvests, or the well-being of the community. Heat was then applied to the bone, causing fine cracks to appear. The patterns of these cracks were observed and interpreted, forming a quiet system of reflection and guidance. The written characters themselves were simple yet expressive. Many were shaped by observation of the natural world, with forms that suggested objects, actions, or ideas. Over time, these symbols became more standardized, forming the early foundation of a writing system that would continue to develop across centuries. The act of writing required patience and precision. Each mark was placed with care, creating a steady rhythm in the process. This careful attention reflects the broader pace of life during the period, where actions were repeated and refined over time. Writing also began to extend beyond ritual use. Records of events, names, and activities were gradually preserved, allowing for a growing sense of continuity. Information could be passed forward, supporting both administration and cultural practice. Within the quiet spaces where these inscriptions were made, there was a sense of connection between the present and the past. Each character carried meaning, linking observation, thought, and tradition. In this way, early writing during the Shang Dynasty became a steady and enduring presence, shaping how knowledge was recorded and shared across generations. As time moved forward, the Zhou dynasty gradually emerged, bringing with it new ways of understanding leadership and order. This period is often associated with the idea known as the mandate of heaven, a concept that shaped how rulers were viewed in relation to the natural world. The mandate of heaven was not a fixed rule, but a gentle framework for understanding balance. It suggested that a ruler's authority was connected to their ability to maintain harmony within the land and among the people. When conditions were stable and the environment remained supportive, leadership was seen as aligned with a greater order. This idea encouraged a steady awareness of responsibility. Rulers were expected to act with care, guiding their communities in ways that preserved balance rather than disruption. Leadership was not only about control, but about maintaining a relationship with the natural rhythms that shape daily life. The structure of governance during the Zhou period became more organized over time. Regions were often managed by local leaders who maintained connection with a central authority. This system allowed for both coordination and flexibility, supporting a wide and varied landscape. Life within the Zhou dynasty continued to follow familiar patterns. Agriculture remained central, with fields cultivated according to seasonal cycles. Villages and towns developed gradually, each contributing to the broader structure of society. The concept of the mandate of heaven also introduced a quiet sense of change over time. If balance was lost, it was believed that leadership could shift, allowing new rulers to emerge. This idea reflected an understanding that stability was something to be maintained, not assumed. Written records from the period show a growing interest in preserving ideas and practices. These records helped carry knowledge forward, supporting continuity across generations. Within this evolving structure, daily life remained steady. People continued their work, families maintained their routines, and the land provided its consistent presence. In this way, The Zhou dynasty represents a period where ideas of leadership and balance became more clearly defined, shaping the quiet relationship between people, rulers, and the natural world. Across the wide landscapes of the Zhou dynasty, daily life unfolded quietly within villages and fields. These rural communities formed the steady foundation of society, where most people lived and worked in close connection with the land. The rhythm of each day was shaped by natural cycles, with sunlight, weather, and seasons guiding activity. Fields stretched outward from the villages, divided into manageable sections. Crops such as millet, wheat, and later rice were planted and tended with care. Farmers used simple tools made of wood and metal, working the soil in slow and consistent motions. The process of planting, watering, and harvesting followed a familiar pattern that repeated year after year. Water was an important part of this landscape. Small channels directed its flow into the fields, helping crops grow steadily. These systems were maintained by the community, with shared effort ensuring that each area received what it needed. This cooperative work strengthened the connections between families and neighbors. Homes in these villages were built using materials drawn from the surrounding environment. Walls of packed earth provided stability, while wooden beams supported thatched roofs. Inside, the space was arranged with simplicity. Cooking areas, sleeping spaces, and storage for tools and food were organized in a practical and balanced way. Animals were kept close to the home, often in small enclosures. They provided food, labor, and companionship, becoming part of the daily routine. Their care was woven into the rhythm of village life. Time moved at an unhurried pace. Mornings began with quiet activity, as people prepared for the day's work. Midday brought a steady continuation of tasks, while evenings allowed for rest and simple gatherings. The changing light marked these transitions, guiding movement without the need for strict measurement. Within these communities, knowledge was passed through observation and practice. Skills related to farming, building, and daily life were learned gradually, shaped by experience. In this way, life in Zhou villages and fields remained grounded and steady, supported by shared effort and a close relationship with the land. Over time, thoughtful ways of understanding the world began to take shape during the later Zhou period. These ideas were not formed in haste, but developed gradually through observation, reflection, and daily experience. Among them were traditions that would later be known as Confucianism and Daoism, each offering a quiet perspective on how to live in balance. Confucian thought focused on relationships and the steady structure of society. It placed importance on respect within families, careful behavior in daily life, and the value of learning from the past. Teachers and scholars shared these ideas through conversation and writing, encouraging a calm and consistent approach to responsibility. Rather than seeking sudden change, this way of thinking supported gradual improvement through repeated practice. In contrast, Taoist thought looked more closely at the patterns of nature. It suggested that life could be lived with ease by following the natural flow of the world. Instead of forcing outcomes, it encouraged a gentle awareness of timing and balance. Rivers, wind, and growing plants were often used as quiet examples of this approach, showing how movement can happen without strain. These traditions did not replace one another, but existed side by side, offering different perspectives. In many cases, people drew from both, shaping their understanding through experience. Together, they contributed to a broader sense of harmony within society. The influence of these ideas could be seen in everyday life. Family relationships were guided by respect and care. Communities maintained a sense of order through shared values. At the same time, individuals found moments of stillness by observing the natural world around them. Places of learning became important spaces where ideas were discussed and refined. Simple halls or quiet outdoor settings provided an environment for teaching and reflection. The pace of learning remained steady, shaped by patience rather than urgency. Over time, these philosophical traditions continued to develop, becoming a lasting part of cultural life. Their influence extended beyond their origins, shaping how people understood both society and nature. In this way, the emergence of these ideas reflects a calm and thoughtful approach to living, grounded in balance, observation, and continuity. After long periods of regional division, the Qin Dynasty brought a new sense of unity across the landscape of ancient China. This unification did not appear all at once, but developed through a steady process of organizing systems that could be shared across distant regions. Over time, roads, measurements, and written forms became more consistent, allowing people to move and communicate with greater ease. The construction of roads played an important role in this process. Paths that once connected nearby villages were extended into longer routes, linking regions that had previously been separate. These roads were built with care, following the natural contours of the land. Travelers moved along them at a measured pace, carrying goods, messages, and ideas between different areas. Standardization also became a quiet part of daily life. Units of weight and measurement were gradually aligned, making trade and exchange more predictable. Written characters were shaped into more uniform forms, allowing records to be read and understood across wider distances. These changes created a sense of shared structure without altering the rhythm of everyday activity. Within towns and settlements, organization became more defined. Administrative centers were established, where records could be kept and decisions managed. These spaces were often simple in appearance, with wooden structures and open courtyards, yet they supported the growing coordination of society. The landscape itself remained varied, with mountains, rivers, and open plains continuing to shape how people lived. The systems introduced during this time worked alongside these natural features, rather than replacing them. Movement through the land still followed familiar patterns, guided by terrain and seasonal change. Daily life continued with a steady pace. Farmers tended their fields, artisans practiced their crafts, and families maintained their routines. The broader changes in organization provided a framework that supported these activities without disrupting them. Over time, the efforts toward unity created a lasting foundation. The idea of a connected landscape, supported by shared systems, became an enduring part of the cultural structure. In this way, the Qin Dynasty represents a period of quiet coordination, where systems were aligned to support a more unified way of life across a wide and varied land. Along the northern edges of ancient China, long stretches of land gradually gave way to open plains and distant horizons. In these areas, early forms of boundary structures began to take shape during and before the Qin period. These structures were not built as a single continuous wall at first, but as separate sections that followed the natural contours of the land. The purpose of these early walls was to create a sense of boundary across wide and often quiet landscapes. They were constructed using materials that were readily available, such as packed earth, stone, and wood. Workers shaped the ground carefully, building raised sections that could withstand wind and weather over time. The construction process moved at a steady pace. Groups of laborers worked together, forming layers of earth that were pressed and compacted to create durable surfaces. These structures often blended into the environment, following ridges, hills, and natural lines across the terrain. Watchtowers were sometimes placed along these routes, providing elevated points from which the surrounding land could be observed. These towers were simple in form, rising just enough to allow a wider view of the horizon. From these vantage points, movement across the landscape could be quietly noted. The regions where these walls were built often felt open and expansive. Grasslands extended outward, and the sky appeared wide and uninterrupted. Wind moved freely across these spaces, carrying subtle sounds over long distances. Despite their scale, these structures were part of a broader environment that remained calm and continuous. Travelers moving near these boundaries did so at a measured pace, following paths that had developed over time. The presence of these early walls did not interrupt daily life within the central regions, but they formed a distant edge where the landscape changed gradually. Over time, these separate sections would influence later developments, becoming part of a larger system of boundary structures. In this way, the early Great Wall can be understood as a quiet extension of the landscape, shaped by steady effort and aligned with the natural features of the land. As the Han Dynasty gradually took shape, systems of governance became more settled and consistent across the landscape. The structure of administration was designed to support daily life without disrupting its natural rhythm. Officials were appointed to oversee different regions, helping maintain records, manage resources, and guide local organization. Administrative centers were often simple in form, built with wood and arranged around open courtyards. Within these spaces, clerks and officials worked quietly with bamboo slips and early forms of paper. They recorded information related to agriculture, population, and trade, creating a steady flow of written records that helped maintain balance across regions. The process of record-keeping required patience and attention. Each character was written carefully, forming lines of text that could be stored and reviewed over time. These records allowed decisions to be made with a sense of continuity, connecting present actions with past observations. Travel between regions became more organized as well. Roads established in earlier periods continued to be used and maintained, allowing messages and goods to move steadily from one place to another. Couriers traveled at a measured pace, carrying written information that linked distant communities. Local governance remained closely connected to the needs of the people. Officials often observed conditions directly, noting the state of crops, water levels, and general well-being. Their role was not only administrative, but also observational, ensuring that changes in the environment were understood and addressed gradually. Education began to play a more visible role in preparing individuals for these responsibilities. Learning was centered on reading, writing, and understanding established ideas. This process unfolded over time, guided by repetition and careful study. Daily life continued with its familiar patterns. Farmers worked their fields, artisans practiced their crafts, and families maintained their routines. The administrative system functioned quietly in the background, supporting these activities without drawing attention. In this way, governance during the Han Dynasty became a steady presence, built on careful record-keeping and thoughtful observation, allowing society to remain balanced and connected over time. During the Han Dynasty, pathways that once connected nearby regions gradually extended into longer routes, forming what would later be known as the Silk Road. These routes were not a single road, but a network of paths that crossed varied landscapes, including valleys, deserts, and mountain passes. Movement along these routes unfolded slowly, guided by the terrain and the changing seasons. Caravans traveled at a steady pace, often made up of traders, animals, and goods carefully packed for long journeys. Silk, known for its smooth texture and lightweight, became one of the most well-known materials carried along these routes. Alongside silk, other goods such as ceramics, metals, and simple crafted items were also exchanged. The act of travel required preparation and patience. Caravans paused at intervals, resting near water sources or in small settlements that had developed along the routes. These places provided shelter and a quiet space for exchange, where goods could be traded and information shared. The landscapes along these routes were varied but often open and expansive. In some areas, wide stretches of land extended toward distant horizons, with only subtle changes in terrain. In others, narrow passes guided movement between higher ground. Each section of the journey had its own pace, shaped by the environment. Trade along these routes was not hurried. Exchanges were made carefully, with attention to value and need. Over time, these repeated interactions created a steady flow of goods moving across long distances. Alongside material items, ideas and practices also traveled, though often gradually and without clear boundaries. Animals such as camels played an important role, carrying goods across areas where travel would otherwise be difficult. Their movement was slow and consistent, matching the rhythm of the journey. Despite the distances involved, the overall process remained calm and continuous. There were no sudden changes, only gradual movement across space and time. In this way, the Silk Road became a quiet connection between regions, shaped by steady travel, careful exchange, and the natural flow of movement across the land. As towns and cities developed during the Han Dynasty, spaces for exchange and daily activity became more defined. Markets formed as steady gathering places where goods were brought, arranged, and quietly traded. These areas were often located within or near city centers, connected by roads that guided movement in a gradual and organized way. The layout of a market was typically simple and structured. Stalls were arranged in rows, allowing people to move through the space at a comfortable pace. Merchants displayed their goods with care, placing items such as grains, textiles, pottery, and tools in clear view. The arrangement created an environment that was both orderly and accessible. Daily activity in the market followed a steady rhythm. In the early part of the day, merchants prepared their spaces, setting out goods and making small adjustments. As the day continued, people arrived to exchange items, often taking time to observe and compare before making decisions. The pace remained unhurried, guided by routine rather than urgency. The sounds within these spaces were soft and dispersed. Conversations took place in low tones, and movement between stalls was measured and calm. There was a sense of continuity, as similar patterns repeated from one day to the next. Markets were not only places for goods, but also for connection. Information moved alongside physical items, shared through quiet conversation. News of distant regions, seasonal changes, or local conditions passed between individuals in a gradual and informal way. Surrounding the market areas, streets extended outward, lined with simple buildings made from wood and earth. These structures housed workshops, storage areas, and living spaces, creating a close relationship between work and daily life. Light entered these spaces in soft patterns, shaped by the position of the sun and the structure of the buildings. Shade provided comfort during warmer periods, while open areas allowed light to settle gently across the ground. In this way, markets during the Han Dynasty became steady centers of daily life, where exchange and routine blended into a calm and continuous flow. Across the dynasties, artistic expression developed gradually, becoming an enduring part of daily life. These forms of art were not created in haste, but shaped through repeated practice and quiet attention to detail. Over time, they reflected both the natural world and the steady rhythms of human activity. Calligraphy emerged as one of the most refined practices. Writing with brush and ink required control, patience, and a steady hand. Each stroke was placed carefully, forming characters that carried both meaning and visual balance. The movement of the brush followed a natural flow, with lines that could appear soft or firm depending on pressure and motion. These written forms were often created on materials such as bamboo slips or silk. The surfaces absorbed ink in a way that preserved the texture of each stroke. The process of writing became more than communication, offering a quiet space for focus and reflection. Painting also developed alongside calligraphy. Artists used simple tools to depict landscapes, plants, and scenes from daily life. Mountains, rivers, and trees were often shown in gentle forms, with soft transitions between light and shadow. These images did not aim for exact detail, but instead conveyed a sense of atmosphere and balance. Craft traditions continued to grow as well. Pottery, weaving, and metalwork were practiced with care, producing objects that were both useful and thoughtfully designed. Patterns were often inspired by nature, reflecting shapes found in plants, water, and flowing lines. Workshops provided calm environments where artisans focused on their craft. These spaces were arranged simply, with tools placed within reach and materials prepared in advance. The pace of work remained steady, guided by repetition and experience. Art was not separate from daily life, but part of it. Objects used in homes, rituals, and routines often carried elements of design, blending function with quiet expression. Over time, these artistic practices became part of a lasting tradition. They continued to evolve while maintaining a connection to earlier forms. In this way, art and craft within ancient China developed as steady and thoughtful processes, shaped by patience, observation, and continuity. Within ancient Chinese society, daily life was closely shaped by family structure and social roles. Households formed the center of activity, providing a place where routines were carried out with consistency and care. These homes were not only living spaces, but also environments where knowledge, habits, and values were passed from one generation to the next. Families often included multiple generations living together or nearby. Elders were respected for their experience, and their presence provided a sense of continuity. Younger members learned through observation, gradually taking on responsibilities as they grew. This steady exchange created a balanced rhythm within the household. Roles within the family were defined in simple and practical ways. Tasks such as preparing food, maintaining the home, and working in the fields were shared according to age and ability. Each activity contributed to the overall well-being of the household, forming a quiet system of cooperation. Homes were arranged to support these daily routines. Courtyards allowed for open space, while interior rooms provided shelter and privacy. Tools, storage containers, and cooking areas were placed with care, creating an environment that was both functional and orderly. Respect and communication played an important role in maintaining harmony. Conversations were often calm and measured, reflecting an awareness of relationships within the family. This approach extended beyond the household, influencing interactions within the wider community. Social structure also extended into larger groups, where roles were recognized within villages and towns. Individuals contributed through their work, whether in farming, crafting, or administration. These roles were not fixed in isolation, but connected through shared needs and responsibilities. Time within the household followed a gentle pattern. Morning activities prepared the day, midday brought steady work, and evenings allowed for rest and quiet interaction. These patterns repeated over long periods, creating a sense of familiarity. In this way, family life formed a steady foundation within ancient Chinese society, shaped by routine, respect, and a gradual sharing of knowledge across generations. Over long periods of time, the structure of dynasties in ancient China followed patterns that unfolded gradually rather than abruptly. Leadership, organization, and daily life would shift in response to changing conditions, creating cycles that moved with a steady and measured pace. At the beginning of a dynasty, there was often a sense of alignment between leadership and the needs of the land. Systems were organized, resources were managed carefully, and communities functioned with a sense of balance. These early periods were marked by attention to stability, allowing routines to settle into consistent patterns. As time continued, populations could grow, and the demands on resources would increase. Fields required more careful management, and administrative systems expanded to support larger regions. These changes were not sudden, but developed slowly as the needs of society evolved. In some periods, maintaining balance became more difficult. Environmental changes, shifts in population, or challenges within leadership could create gradual strain. These conditions did not appear all at once, but formed over time, often noticed through subtle changes in daily life. When imbalance continued, new forms of leadership might begin to emerge. This process reflected the broader understanding that stability was something to be maintained through care and attention. The idea that change could occur when balance was lost became part of the long rhythm of history. Even during times of transition, daily life often continued with familiar routines. People tended their fields, cared for their homes, and maintained community connections. The larger shifts in leadership unfolded alongside these steady activities, rather than replacing them. Over generations, this pattern repeated. dynasties rose, developed, and gradually gave way to new forms, each shaped by the conditions of its time. The process remained continuous, without clear beginnings or endings, only gradual movement from one state to another. In this way, the cycles between dynasties can be understood as part of a broader rhythm, where change occurs slowly, guided by the ongoing relationship between people, land, and leadership. Across many centuries, the dynasties of ancient China formed a continuous and gently evolving presence. Each period contributed its own patterns of life, yet all remained connected through shared practices, ideas, and a steady relationship with the land. Rather than existing as separate moments, these dynasties can be understood as part of a long and unbroken flow. The landscapes remained a constant foundation throughout this passage of time. Rivers continued their slow movement, fields were cultivated in repeating cycles, and settlements expanded or shifted with quiet intention. These natural elements provided stability, allowing human activity to unfold within a familiar environment. Within this continuity, knowledge was carried forward through writing, teaching, and daily practice. Skills related to farming, craft, governance, and art were passed between generations, shaped by experience and careful observation. Over time, these shared understandings created a lasting cultural framework. The structures of society, including families, communities, and systems of leadership, adapted gradually. Change did not erase what came before, but built upon it, forming layers of development that remained connected. Even as new dynasties emerged, they often retained elements of earlier traditions, allowing continuity to remain present. The pace of life, shaped by daylight, seasons, and natural rhythms, remained steady across generations. Daily routines continued with quiet consistency, whether in fields, workshops, homes, or administrative spaces. These repeated actions created a sense of familiarity that extended across time. Art, philosophy, and writing also contributed to this continuity. They offered ways to reflect, record, and express ideas, allowing them to endure beyond individual lifetimes. Through these forms, the past remained present within the ongoing flow of life. In this way, ancient Chinese dynasties can be seen not as isolated periods, but as parts of a larger, continuous landscape of history. Each contributed quietly to a lasting whole, shaped by balance, adaptation, and steady progression. The result is a sense of enduring continuity, where time moves forward gently, carrying with it the accumulated presence of many generations.